questions during the presentation, you can make little comments. I will be sending out the video on our YouTube channel and the link after today's call, as well as the attendance list. So that's what's going to come out today. So welcome to training. Today we are going to be focusing on pending receipts, which I know is a big topic for everybody. Something, if you're in Coupa long enough, becomes kind of a love-hate relationship kind of thing. And so today we're really going to focus on the mechanics behind pending receipts and why they occur. Because there are many different scenarios as to how pending receipts occur. Lots of different scenarios, guys. So I can't possibly go over every scenario you're ever going to run into, but we can at least talk about the mechanics of why pending receipts happen, what to look for in terms of how to clear pending receipts, okay? So the first thing is, pending receipts are really a responsibility of everyone in the company. It's not specific to buyers, it's not specific to end users, it's not specific to accounts payable, it's not specific to warehouse. Pending receipts are really a global effort, and they do require everyone to pay attention to them and research them and want to figure out what's going on and get them corrected. So let's start first with what is a pending receipt. So a pending receipt is, which I will share with, I'll share my screen in Coupa. Pending receipt is an invoice status. That's what it is. It's literally a status of an invoice in Coupa. So first, we know the invoice has to be in Coupa. Second, it's just the status of the invoice. So instead of paid, instead of approved, instead of pending approval, it's pending receipt. So what does pending receipt mean? Pending receipt means that the three-way match is not functioning. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that you're missing a receipt necessarily. It could. It doesn't mean that you got the product. It doesn't mean you need to go take action on something. It could. There's a lot of scenarios around fixing a pending receipt, but in general, we need to understand that a pending receipt is basically just the system telling us that somewhere on this invoice, the three-way match is not occurring. Okay, so let's talk about what needs to match. Okay, because it's a little different, and that's where we start to get in some specifics. So I created a little PowerPoint for everybody, hoping that this kind of illustrates how pending receipts happen, how they occur, what's going on with them. And so here we go. So when we're looking at pending receipts, so it's a header information. So when an invoice is entered into Coupa and something happens where the three-way match isn't happening, the header of the invoice says pending receipt. But what we have to understand is all of the matching is done at the line level. Okay, so if there's 5 lines on your invoice, all 5 of those lines match 3 ways, right? So technically that's 15 points of matching. Get it? So that leads us to understand line 1 could have one reason it's not working, and line 5 could have a different reason that it's not matching. So that's kind of the big picture of why pending receipts happen. And the fact that we're looking at the line level information when we're trying to figure out why something isn't being paid. So if it's correct, and for invoices that never hit pending receipts, they're matching the PO line information versus the receipt information versus the invoice information. And all 3 of these things are like jiving, they match, they're cool. There's no discrepancies, and the system's like, yay, everything equals and it pays it. never ends up in pending receipt. Okay, so in pending receipt, if the invoice has a pending receipt status, something is going on. It could be one of these, it could be all of them. It could be a different one on a line 1 of the invoice than line 5 of the invoice. Okay, so when we're looking and researching pending receipts and we're trying to figure out why it's pending receipt, that is really the starting point of the research and why it even hit that queue in the first place. Okay, so that is the really high level. Now there's kind of some second level information that we have to consider. Pending receipts happen for different reasons. If the purchase order is a quantity purchase order, like if the line is a quantity versus an amount. Okay, and we issue POs for quantity and amount for very different reasons, right? But invoicing needs to be considered when we're issuing purchase orders. Okay, when we're building SPOs, when we're flipping free text requisitions, we need to kind of understand how the invoicing piece is going to happen and going to occur, because when we get to this point, it does affect how things happen, like from a pending receipt perspective. So we're going to start with the PO is a quantity. So the PO is a quantity, meaning the invoice has to be a quantity as well. And so why do quantity POs end up in pending receipt? Kind of the same reason. So you see, same overarching dynamic of if it doesn't end up in pending receipts, right? Everything matches, we're all happy. If something is messed up where one of these things is not matching, it's gonna push it to pending receipt, and we gotta figure out why. What's not matching? Why isn't it matching? What is the corrective action to get it to match? Basically, super simple, okay? So this is like super high level, and we're gonna actually look at a couple of examples and tests and how they relate to these pictures. Okay, so on slide 4 here, we have a pending receipt example, and we're actually going to look at this invoice and test. Okay, and if it was right, all of the things would match. And here is what it's actually showing us in Coupa. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to actually look this up. And I really hope this is making sense, because pending receipts can get incredibly complex and take a lot of time to research. And so just kind of keep that in mind as we're going through this process, as we're picking a couple of very common examples to look at today. These are relatively simple examples. So they do get kind of more complex, or they can. So just keep in mind, we're really trying to focus on why it happens, so that as you guys encounter pending receipts, you could research them and figure out why they're occurring and then fix them. So there's going to be lots of other reasons why pending receipts happen outside of the examples in today's call. Okay. So I'm going to search this invoice, and notice we kind of talked at the header level. It's telling me it's pending receipt. Okay, so how do I figure out why it's pending receipt? So I'm going to go into the invoice detail by clicking the invoice number. And as I'm looking at this, I have to remember this is the invoice itself, right? There's not a PDF somewhere. This was input into Coupa. So for all intents and purposes, regardless of what the vendor shows on a piece of paper, this is the invoice I'm worried about paying, is the one in Coupa. Okay, so if I scroll down, it's telling me there's some tolerance failures on lines, meaning, right, we talked about pending receipt, things always happen at the line level. So I'm going to scroll down to the line, and I'm going to say, oh, look, there's one line. So we talked about very simple. There's one line on this invoice. They're invoicing me for 6 cases of this item. And notice when we're talking about PO quantities, quantity and unit of measure matches, quantity and unit of measure matches, and quantity matches. Notice price is not on here. If there's a price difference only, that is going to route to a variance approval queue. Very different from pending receipt, okay? Pending receipt primarily focuses on quantities and unit of measures. So when we go back in here, I can say they're invoicing me for 6 cases, and this price is 22, although it's relatively arbitrary. And so why isn't this matching? What's going on? There's 2 things that this has to match. It has to match the purchase order, and it has to match the receipt. So if I open this purchase order up, because I want to look at the PO, and I need to look at the receipt, because those are the 3 things that come together. So if I look at the purchase order, again, line level detail. So there's multiple lines on this PO. So how do I know which line the invoice is talking about? Like, how do I know which line this is matching up to? I could look at description. I would caution against that because line 3, notice, it's trying to match this information up with line 3 on your PO. So I'm going to go to line 2, line 3. It is the right description. I do have 6 cases. So, hey, we now know the invoice matches the PO. Now I need to look at the receipt. Receipt number 0. That doesn't match. It needs to match. Okay. So just like this little description here, the PO per line, quantity and unit of measure, that matches the invoice quantity and unit of measure, but the receipt quantity isn't equal or greater. So the system can't pay this. So how do we get this out of pending receipt? We receive 6. Now, do we just go in and receive it? No. We make sure we actually got the 6, okay? Now, that's not a Coupa process, but as someone who works here, I definitely don't want to pay for stuff just because the supplier sends me an invoice. I want to pay for stuff because I got it. So whoever's researching this, we need to make sure we got these 6 cases, then we can go in and perform the receipt, okay? So if I go in and I'm going to pretend that I confirmed that we're good, that I made sure we got this order, I know the 6 cases are on property, I'm going to go in and receive it. Now the end user can receive it, or the warehouse can receive it, right? If they know they got it, they can receive it. So we are going in here and we are going to find the PO number 449704. Now this is central receiving functionality. So if you're watching this video and you're an end user, you are going to receive it a little different. It's going to look a little different than what central receiving is going to look like. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to receive my 6 cases. I'm going to consume it because it is not an inventory item. And I'm going to attach any paperwork I have, a POD, anything like that here, and then I'm going to submit it. So once the receipt occurs, right, that means that there's now 6 here. So if I go back to the invoice, I can refresh this screen, take a look at the invoice, and now it's going to tell me that it's no longer pending receipt. It's going to ask for a couple of approvals here for various reasons, but it is going to tell me that it matches. The 3 things that need to match, and it's going to pay it. Okay. So that is a very simplistic view of pending receipt and how you fix it. The second example we're going to look at here is this invoice. Okay. So, and I kind of wrote everything down here in advance so you guys can see what it's supposed to look like. But we're going to go in and again, we're going to look at the invoice because you can't have a pending receipt without an invoice. And we're going to put the invoice number here. I'm going to notice that my invoice is pending receipt. For more details, I'm going to click on the invoice number. Now it's telling me there's a couple failures here at the line level because it's pending receipt. There's 1 line on here. It looks like this cyber power, there's 4. I'm going to click on this PO and I'm going to open the PO up so I can look at the PO. Now I'm going to scroll down. There's 1 line on the PO. Seems pretty straightforward. There's 4. There's 4. What in the heck? Why isn't it paying it? Well, that's because if you notice, there's some invoices here that maybe don't add up to what we think they do. So this approved invoice, there's a pending invoice, and then there's a total invoice of $278. So these could be multiple invoices. It could be, it really depends. But so I'm going to figure out like what's going on, right? This is a little weird because it looks like maybe there's a duplicate invoice here, right? Maybe I got a duplicate shipment. But if I click on that, it's going to immediately take me to invoices. It's going to apply all these filters and it's going to show me all of the invoices that are attached to that purchase order line. Okay, again, we're matching at the line level. So if I look, there's 1 invoice that's been approved and 1 invoice that's pending receipt. Very different invoice numbers, very different dates. So a couple things could be happening here, right? I could have gotten a duplicate shipment. This could be a duplicate invoice. One of them could have been damaged and I'm waiting for a credit, right? So I can open these up and I can take a look at each invoice and say, well, this is for 4 each. That's what I ordered. That's what it costs. If I look at the second invoice that's already been approved, mind you. Oh, yep. I ordered 4 of them, 4 each. So in this case, while we now know why it's happening, we know why the pending receipt occurred, right? There's only 4 on the PO. There's only 4 in the receipt, but these 2 invoices together on that line equal 8. The system won't pay that because it doesn't match. So what do? So in this case, we need to figure out why the second invoice is here. It could be a duplicate. Like I said, the first one could have been damaged and we need a credit for this invoice. It could have been a duplicate shipment and we should have rejected it and we didn't. So are we going to return it or are we going to keep it? So all of those questions play into how we solve this. If this invoice truly needs to be paid and we've done the research and we're like, you know what, for whatever reason, this invoice needs to be paid, right? We received 2 or we received double or, you know, whatever happened. We need to make these match. So in order to have 8, we need to increase the PO to 8 and we need to increase the receipts to 8. And then it'll pay this second invoice for 4 because this will total 8, this will total 8, and this will total 8. If we don't want to pay this, we either need a credit or we need to void it. Those are our options. We can dispute it back to the supplier and say, hey, I don't know why I'm being invoiced for this. Please provide a POD, right? Those are just some of the steps to solve this problem, but that's why it's happening, okay? So those are kind of some basic examples of why pending receipts occur, and they're very simple. So remember, you could have both of those issues on one invoice, right? They're line level information. So it's really important to pay attention to the details of an invoice, the details of a purchase order, the details of a receipt. So the next section here, we talked a little bit about it before, where pending receipts change a little bit if the PO is an amount, okay? So with the PO being an amount, they match per dollar. It doesn't match per quantity. It doesn't care about unit of measure because unit of measure doesn't exist. It only looks at dollars, and they are buckets, guys. They're not like, we don't match receipts to invoices like Stratton Warren does. It's just a bucket, okay? Which kind of doesn't make sense when you're looking at it like this. But when you look at the example we have, here's a good example, okay? So while in pending receipt, we have a purchase order of $90,000, okay? And that's just what it is. It's $90,000, it's an amount. And then if we look at all the receipts that are attached to this one line on this PO, and we look at all of the invoices that are attached to the one line on the PO, that's when we discover more of what's happening. Like, that is how you discover what's going on. So in this example, and I'm going to pull it up real fast and test so we can physically see what it looks like. The PO dollar is 90,000. So really, really high, plenty of money. It's there. The invoices equal $4,418.86, 2 of which are paid, 2 are pending receipt. But why? I don't understand. Because if you look, invoice number 2 was $399.35, and here's a receipt for $399.35. Why didn't it pay it? Right? Well, that's because it's a bucket. And it's first in, first out. That's how Coupa works. First in, first out. So when we are looking at the actual invoice itself, this is just one example. So it's this example, invoice number 1 here, but it doesn't mean it's the only pending receipt against that PO. So we have to, again, when you're looking at something, it's very important to understand at the line level all of the pieces that tie into that line so you can understand where the 3-way match is not occurring. Okay. Now, in an amount scenario, so I'm going to look at the details of this invoice. In an amount scenario, it's just a big bucket of money. Okay. So that's why it's super important to understand and to be cautious when you're creating invoices or purchase orders for buckets of money, is because it truly is a bucket of money. Okay. Coupa does not care how you spend it. Coupa's not going to stop you from applying something that shouldn't be applied there, right? That's all manual. So just keep in mind when you're performing buyer action, buyers, keep in the back of your head. This one, however, is like, hey, I don't understand. It's $1,000. If I open the purchase order and I look at the PO and I scroll, money has already been used to pay other invoices, right? So that receipt was used to pay these 2 invoices. These 2 can't be paid yet because approved receipt money. And this is like, hey, I have $4,000 I need to pay total. So when you're in here and you're kind of looking at amounts, it's important to know all the pieces that attach, not just the singular invoice that you're looking at. Because if I were to say, hey, this is $1,084, and if I were to just read this and I would say needs a receipt of $271.06 to get paid. That's what the system is telling me. That's true for this invoice, but the system is not calculating this second invoice down here. That's something we have to do when we're researching. So in this particular case, how do I get this paid? Well, I need to find my total invoice dollar, I need to find my receipts, and I need to make sure there's enough received to cover all of the invoices attached to the line. So in this case, if I need to make sure these 2 invoices that are pending get paid, I would need to ensure that the invoice dollar is the same as the receipt dollar. So do I receive $4,000? No. I would actually receive the difference. So I would receive $4,418.86 minus $2,622.53. Because it's a bucket, I don't need to have a receipt specific to this dollar. I don't need to have a receipt specific to this dollar to get it paid. It's just a big old bucket. So once I figure out the dollar, that is when I will go and perform the receipt. And that is when it's going to pay those 2 invoices. Now, another thing to note is that, like I said earlier, because it's a big bucket, Coupa pays first in, first out. So if this invoice number 2 here was entered first and has an older date on it than this invoice, and I don't want to pay this yet, but I want to pay this one, not how Coupa works either. So if it's pending receipt and I go and receive $1,000, it's going to pay the invoice that has the older date on it first. So in order for me not to pay this and pay this, I have to get this out of pending receipts, meaning we have to dispute it, then perform the receipt to get invoice number 1 paid. Okay. So that is kind of some basic examples why pending receipts occur, how they look at things, how they match, and what you can do to kind of research why the three-way match isn't occurring and what you can do to fix it.